do what we call an expanding torrent, find the weak point of the Russians, smash through as you would with water flowing through a gap, and then expand around that and take out their logistics.
Yeah.
That is psychologically demoralizing and leads to the collapse, a bit like sort of France in May 1940. Good evening, John.
Hi, let's talk about the big topic of the moment, tanks. So the tanks are on their way, a number of tanks are on their way to Ukraine, but it will also take months, won't it, to train the crews and, crucially, to establish supply lines for fuel and ammunition for those tanks. Months. Now, that's worrying, isn't it, Chip? If you were Vladimir Putin and his commanders, would you not be thinking, well, look, there's a bit of time here, maybe we've got a window to make a big first move?
Well, we assume that the Ukrainians have already got some capability to do offensive operations if they want. But I think there's two other important things to do with this, John. The first one is that the fact that, for example, Germany have moved from giving 5,000 helmets 11 months ago to Leopard tanks now, and all the other countries, because of course the contact group is 50 nations, much wider than NATO, shows that capturing the perception of foreign audiences uh, replaces sort of seizing terrain as a new high ground. So the first thing to say is that this is a just fight, and all those nations have actually recognised that. It is worrying in the sense that whoever beats the other side to the punch has a good chance of some sort of offensive success. But the caveat to that is the latest intelligence from the Americans is that Russia is sending tens of thousands of mobilized replacement troops to strengthen the positions in the sort of Bakhmut sector weakened by the fighting, and assesses that they are ill trained, ill equipped, and rushed to the battlefield. So we're not in a stalemate, the other part of intelligence this week by Avril Haines. There are still significant challenges for both sides, and whoever manages to overcome those challenges has the better chance of some at least tactical gains in the short term in the spring.
Right. Now, we've discussed these attacks a lot in recent days in broad terms. Can you give me I don't know, a closer battlefield perspective as a an experienced commander? Just tell me if you can, Chip, how, if you were in command of those forces when they arrive as they are now, how would you use the tanks as they become available?
Well, don't penny pack it, mass if you can, and you've got the time to do that. And I say that because there are four factors for success in 20th century warfare. First one is control of the air. The second one is shock action. Third is surprise, and the fourth one is offensive recce. Now, of course, two, three, and four all apply here. If you can apply massed armored formations, combined arms formations, infantry, armor, engineers, artillery, and of course air defense, to do what we call an expanding torrent, find the weak point of the Russians, smash through as you would with water flowing through a gap, and then expand around that and take out their logistics.
Yeah.
That is psychologically demoralizing and leads to the collapse, a bit like sort of France in May 1940. So that's the ideal way to use them. But of course, depending if they arrive piecemeal and depending on whether Ukraine is under any pressure, tanks can also be used for mobile defense or to aid in delaying operations. You won't win wars by those things, and that's why if Ukraine wants to reclaim their lost territory, they need to go on offensive operations
Yes.
using all those combined arms
Right.
activities that I've mentioned.
So the tanks can punch through the lines, troops can then pour through. You can take the territory, but air cover just does seem to be so important. It does seem, doesn't it, that acquiring more warplanes is going to be very much next on the list.
Yeah, and that's why I deliberately mentioned that, John. So if the eighth contact group, the one which we had in Ramstein last week, was all about armour, the ninth one, which is in sort of mid-Feb, is all about aviation. And really, they need a suite of capabilities. They need suppression of enemy air defence. So they've been pretty good at that in terms of the harm missiles that the Americans have given them. And they need sort of strike capability with offensive counter-air, defensive counter-air, close air support. And the best fighter that gives them that potential ability would be the American F 16. And there's a lot of those around. in the way that, for example, European air forces aren't. And of course, there are only a very limited number of squadrons. So if you want to do that punch through, which I've mentioned, not only do you need those combined arms capabilities, that's why I mentioned about the 4 factors for success, because at least combat parity, would be useful. You would ideally like air superiority, but that may be difficult. But at least air parity when you're doing those offensive operations. And of course, one of the most unsuccessful things for the Russians has been how woeful their air force has been and the ability to generate very limited sorties over the battlefield. So a big weakness for the Russians over the last 11 months.